We're beginning the verses of Zikhronot today. We finished the 10 verses of Malchliot, and we are starting off again with the 3 Torah verses. Most of the Machzorim that people use today are running the Torah verses in order of sequence. So the first time the word comes is when you see it. So the very first time that the root Zocher, God remembering, shows up in Torah is when God remembers Noah in the story of the flood. So that's what we're going to look at in terms of the verse today. But I want to just start off, before we look at the verse itself, with the 2 competing understandings of what it means for God to remember something on Rosh Hashanah. And both of those come out in the introduction section of the Zikhronot, almost back to back. So we see this sort of competing idea of what does it mean for God to remember. Ki zecher kol hayitzur lefanecha ba ma'aseh ish ufkudato, ki zecher kol ha'ma'asim lefanecha ba va'ata doresh ma'aseh kulam. This is sort of the scary side of God remembering everything. We can't remember all the deeds that we have done, but God remembers the deeds that we have done, all the deeds that we have done, and is coming to examine the Doresh Ma'aseh Kulam, and sort of coming to not quite accuse, but at least sort of investigate and seek out the depths of all those deeds. That is to say, it's the Rosh Hashanah is the moment when we are called to account for all the actions that we did during the year, and we as humans can't even remember those, but God does remember them, and that might be sort of like a scary side of remembering. Imagine if a family member could recall all of your faults and foibles and spit them back out at you, on one day. That might be a scary endeavor. But there's another side of the remembering, which I think comes out much more strongly in the Psukim, which is also mentioned in the introduction to Zikhronot, which is V'gam et Noach bi'ahava zacharta. You also remembered Noach with love. And here the remembering is less about deeds and more about recalling or sort of renewing a relationship. It's the love aspect of remember. It's remembering someone as a catalyst for the further emotional development of that connection. And that's going to lead us into our pasuk today. And I think we'll run through a number of the psukim of Zikhronot, which is less about God remembering all the deeds and not forgetting anything that we've done, and more about remembering us with love. So as I said, Noach is the first time that the root zocher, that the root remembering is used in Torah. So the remembering, it's not just Noach, but everybody in the ark, every being in the ark. And it that leads to action. The memory leads to action. God causes the wind to pass over the land, and the water recedes. So the remembering here is a remembering of love that also isn't just like a feeling; it's also a feeling that precedes an action. And that's, of course, the remembering that we hope God will show us on Rosh Hashanah. So let's take a look at some of the midrashim that play off this verse. One of the early mentions of Zocher in Torah, there's one time where Vayizkor met Abraham, when Lot is captured. But the next time after Noach and Abraham is Vayizkor met Rachel, Vayishma Eleha Elohim Vayiftach et Rachma. God remembers Rachel and again listens to her. So we'll see the twinning of Zocher and Shomea. God remembers and God hears. Shomea also obviously headed towards Shofarot. And it's followed by an action, by Yiftach et Rachma. God remembers, but God opens the womb as a result of the remembering. So let's just look at this midrash, which is based off of, in Breshit Rabbah, based off of this moment of remembering of Rachel, God remembering Rachel, but we'll see that sort of circles back to our Noach verse. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, woe to the evildoers who transform the attribute of mercy to the attribute of judgment, from rachamim to din. Wherever it says Hashem, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, that is the attribute of rachamim. When we use God's name, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, the 4-letter unpronounceable name of God, that indicates God's merciful aspect. As we'll see later, Elohim indicates God's judgment aspect. And so what we see is, even though we have the mention of God's merciful aspect, Yud Vav Hey, it's going to be used for din in certain moments of the Torah because of the Rishaim. So normally Yud Vav Hey should be associated with Rachamim, with mercy, as in Adonai Adonai Rachum Bechanun, or Adonai Arachapayim B'Rav Chesed. But it is written, Adonai saw the evil of people was great. Vayar Adonai, should have been Elohim, Vayar Adonai ki rabara Adam, and Vayinachem Adonai ki asad Adam, and God regretted that God made people. Yud Vav Hey regretted. This seems to be a Yud Vav Hey moving from Rachamim, nevertheless, to moving to Din. But you have the reverse as well, which is, these are the exceptions to the rule. The rule is that Yud Vav Hey should be mercy, Elohim should be Din, but the exceptions here are being played out as results of certain people. So the Rishaim move Yud Vav Hey to be on the judgment side, but the Tzadikim move Elohim to be on the merciful side. But happy are the righteous who transform the attribute of judgment, din, to the attribute of mercy. Now we know wherever it says Elohim, it's the attribute of judgment. Al tikalel Elohim. But it also says Elohim heard their cries. Vayishma Elohim et nakatam. Vayizkor Elohim. That we're going to look at the pasuk tomorrow from the beginning of Shemot. And we have our verse as well. God remembered Vayizkor Elohim at Noach. So Noach in this midrash is the tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav, but here at least is tzaddik enough to move the din side of God, Elohim, to be rachamim. In other words, Vayizkor Elohim at Noach, you would have expected it to say Vayizkor Yud Vav Hey at Noach, because that's the merciful side, but Noach is able to transform the din aspect of God, Elohim, to be rachamim, and therefore the remembering in that moment is a sign of God's mercy, and that's of course the remembering moment of Rosh Hashanah. So Vayizkor Elohim et Noach, don't be scared by the word Elohim. This is not a din remembering, it's a rachamim remembering. Even though we might have expected it to be a judgment remembering, God remembers all of our deeds and judges us, here it remembers Noach. Okay, let's look at one other midrash here. This is from the book of Kohelet, is playing out this little story in the middle of Kohelet about a city that gets sieged. And the midrash understands this to be the story of Noah. So let's see, because what we're going to see, there's another aspect of God's remembering. It's not just that God remembers us in love as opposed to remembers all of our deeds, which is hanging out in the background but is not centered on these psukim, but also that God remembers us in love as opposed to people who forget. People forget and are not able to sort of come through on the relationship. But God is able to remember, and in contrast to people, is able to make good on that remembering and that deep connection that we yearn for in our human relationships, but don't always find. So this is the way the Midrash brings out this understanding. First, the verses from Kohelet. There was a little city with few people in it, Ir Ktana, V'anashim Ba'me'at, and to it came a great king, who invested in it and built mighty siege works against it. Okay, so a king comes to siege against this city. Present in the city was a poor wise man, Ish Miskein Chacham. There was a poor wise man in the city who might have saved the city from the siege of the king with his bechokmato, with his wisdom, but nobody, Adam lo zachar et ha'isha miskeinahu. Nobody thought of or remembered that poor man. This man, this wise man, could have saved the city, but people weren't able to remember him, to notice him, to take account of him, and as a result, the city is destroyed by the king. So let's see how the Midrash plays this out. It shows up in Kol Rabbah and Tarchuma. In Tarchuma, the little city, this is the world, Za'olam, with few people in it. This is the generation of the flood. And to it came a great king, that's Melech Malchei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and built mighty siege works against it, which is to say, said that Hineni mashchitam et haaretz, I'm going to destroy the entire world. Present in the city was a poor wise man. This is Noah, who might have saved it with his wisdom, as it says, come you and all your household into the ark. Presumably in this moment, that's the Midrashim of Noach telling everybody you should come into the ark. But no one thought of or remembered that man. Nobody paid attention to Noach in this scene of trying to urge people to do something. But Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Adam lo zichro. People don't remember Noach. Aval ani zochro. But I remember Noach. Shneimar vayizkor Elohim et Noach. So here you have our verse being used as this contrast to the ways in which people do not connect to other people. People do not remember other people in love, but God does. And again, in this sort of understanding of God as remembering us and this relationship via Hava with love, as opposed to God remembering every single deed and taking account of them, although that's hiding in the background, in this verse at least, we see that God remembers us in love, and perhaps in contrast to the ability even of humans to remember each other in love.